So in 8th grade math section 2.1, we're dealing with integers and absolute values. So integers are basically numbers, whole numbers, and we're dealing with absolute value, which basically means the distance from 0. We'll get into that, but first we're going to deal with inequalities down here. An inequality compares numbers using less than or greater than sign. Okay, so this is less than or greater than. You might have remembered this in elementary school when we were dealing with the opening, the mouth goes towards the bigger number. So you compare, showing which one is bigger. Okay, so we write an integer for each situation. So in the first example, it's asking us to write a number that represents 32 feet underground. Now, if you consider ground level as 0, anything above it would be positive, anything below it would be negative. So we have negative numbers is below 0, positive numbers is above 0. So if 0 is represented by ground level, then 32 feet underground will be represented as negative 32 feet. Okay? When we deal with 8 weeks after birth, we can say that it's positive 8 weeks, or we can just represent it with 8. It could be this or this. Okay? Both represent the positive value. Now, if we write two inequalities involving 6 and negative 4. So, since 6 is further right on the coordinate line, we can say that 6 is bigger than negative 4. Or we can say the opposite. We can say that negative 4 is is smaller than 6. So there's two ways to write these inequalities. I can say negative 4 is smaller, less than 6, or I can say 6 is greater than negative 4. Either way I write it, the opening always goes to the bigger number, which in this case is 6. Okay? So when they ask us on 2b, make this true, negative 2 and 3, we have to use less than, greater than, or equal. Since negative 2 is smaller on the coordinate line and 3 is bigger, we're going to make the opening towards a 3, so it's going to be less than sign. So it reads negative 2 is less than 3. Now I know this is pretty simple and straightforward. It's just to remind you about positive and negatives, okay? So go ahead and pause the video and write this down. I have another board. So this board is dealing with the absolute value, okay? So what it wants us to do here is to first, let's define the absolute value. It's basically the distance from 0. So you can say that it's never negative, but the logical thing is just where it is from 0. For example, you can never be negative weight, okay? You can be like point something weight, but not negative weight. Distance, if I go forward 2 feet or backwards 2 feet, I'm still traveling 2 feet nonetheless. It just matters where I move from point A to point B, but it doesn't matter whether I'm going forwards or backwards, so negative doesn't play a part. Okay, so absolute value represents things where negative is not a part of it. So for example, if I'm dealing with 6 units, okay, if I'm going 6 miles back home, then my distance is always positive. That means if I go 6 miles from my home, okay, then the absolute value of 6 is 6. So it takes 6 miles there, okay? If I go 6 miles backwards, even if I walk backwards, I'm still doing 6 miles, okay? And your body will tell you, because when you run 6 miles backwards and you run 6 miles back home, it does not put negatives on your workout for that day. So if I do negative 6 miles, it still represents that I traveled 6 miles, okay? So that's what the absolute value is telling me, that whatever is in these things, in these brackets, okay, whether it's negative 6, this is going to be positive 6. If it's negative 2, this is going to be positive 2. if this is 3, it's still going to be positive 3. It's the same value. If it's positive inside, it's the same positive outside. Okay? Now this is a different story. If the negative is on the outside, then that means this negative goes, attaches. So for example, if I have a negative on the outside and a negative 2, well, this makes a positive 2, but I still carry this negative here. But that's going a little bit more complicated, and we'll go into more depth later on that. Okay? So, the first question is to if the next set of problems, 3A, is telling us to evaluate the expression. So basically, in this case, I'm going to represent what is on the inside. So 5 in there can be represented as 5 on the outside. Okay? Negative 8 plus negative 1. Well, negative 8, first let's figure out the absolute value. Before you add them together, I want you to show your work. I know you might be able to do it in your head, but if you get it wrong, we can figure out where exactly you went wrong. So let's just focus on the absolute value first before we add them together. Negative 8 in the absolute value represents 8. Okay? This will be an equal sign like that. Plus, negative 1 in the absolute value is 1. So 8 plus 1 is 9. And this, number 4, is telling us to evaluate if x equals negative 2. So if x equals negative 2, we're going to put a negative 2 in here, plus 8. Again, we're going to evaluate the absolute value first. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2. And since 8 doesn't have an absolute value, I'm going to leave that, leaving me with 10. Let's make sure to box our answers. Okay? So, that's hopefully that's straightforward enough. If not, don't worry, we'll figure it out in class. But go ahead and try it on your own. Page 64, numbers 11, 12, and 14. Page 64, number 11, 12, and 14. Thanks, guys.